The history of the world is a tapestry of light and shadow. Yet the keepers of the flame often choose to hide the darkest threads. We are told of the miracles of Joshua, the healing, the bread, the wine, but there are scrolls never written, and stories told only in the dying embers of desert campfires, passed down by the Masons and the exiles of the Levant. These are the oral traditions of the silent years. They speak of a young Messiah who did not just wait for his time, but who walked into the very heart of human darkness to face the ancient curses of our bloodline. Before he broke the bread, he broke the chains of the abyss. This is not the history you know. This is the account of the horrors Joshua encountered while he lived as a man among men. Listen closely, for the silence of the desert hides a terrifying truth. Plus. Part 1. The Woven Curse of the Nazareth Shroud. In the year that Joshua turned 21, the air in Nazareth was thick with the scent of cedar and the dust of the Roman roads. He was a man of the earth, his hands stained with the resin of the wood and the grit of the quarry. To the villagers, he was merely the son of the carpenter, a man of quiet strength. But Joshua knew that the world was a thin veil, and beneath it, ancient hungers moved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Galilean hills, a blacksmith named Levi stumbled into Joshua's workshop. Levi was a man of iron, yet he was trembling like a leaf in a gale. In his arms, he clutched a heavy, hooded cloak made of thick, dark wool. "Joshua," Levi gasped, his eyes wide with a feverish light. "I am cursed. I bought this garment from a traveler at the gates for a single copper shekel. The woman who sold it to me smiled as if she were giving me a kingdom. But every time I put it on, I feel 1,000 needles piercing my lungs. I hear the weeping of a woman in my sleep. And my skin. Look at my skin." Levi pulled back his tunic. His chest was covered in red, angry welts, forming patterns that looked like suffocating vines. Joshua took the cloak. As his fingers brushed the wool, he did not feel the softness of the weave. He felt a cold, jagged vibration, the frequency of a soul that had been murdered in silence. He laid the garment upon his workbench. "Levi," Joshua said, his voice low and steady, "the world sees a bargain, but the abyss sees an anchor. This is not wool from the backs of sheep." Joshua took a sharp iron chisel. With the precision of a master, he sliced through the heavy hem of the cloak. As the seam split, a foul, metallic odor filled the small workshop, the smell of old blood and stagnant water. From the opening of the garment, something began to spill out. It wasn't wool, it wasn't linen, it was human hair. Buoy talk, clumps of hair, long, black, and unnervingly glossy, tumbled onto the floor like a nest of dead serpents. It was the hair of 100 different women, woven together with a terrifying, rhythmic obsession. Joshua reached deep into the lining and pulled out a lock of hair that was still wet with a dark, viscous fluid. In the dark places of the world, Joshua spoke, his eyes fixed on the hair. "There are those who believe that by weaving the remains of the dead, they can capture the life of the living. This cloak was not made for warmth. It was made to consume." The hair on the floor began to twitch. The dark strands coiled around the legs of the workbench. Moving with a mindless, parasitic hunger, Levi backed away, nearly falling over a pile of lumber. Who would do this?" "A weaver of shadows," Joshua replied. "One who was cheated of life and now seeks to steal the breath of others to fill her own hollow soul." Joshua closed his eyes. He placed his scarred, carpenter's hands directly onto the pile of moving hair. Levi watched in awe as a faint, golden warmth began to emanate from Joshua's palms. It wasn't a flame, but a searing purity that seemed to boil the air. A horrific, high-pitched shriek, a sound that did not come from a throat, but from the vibration of the room itself, tore through the workshop. The hair beneath Joshua's hands began to wither. The glossy black turned to a brittle, ashen gray. The life force that had been stolen and stored within the weave was being forcibly released by the presence of the Creator's Son. "Go to the valley of Hinnom," Joshua commanded, his voice echoing with a divine authority that shook the tools on the wall. "Take what remains and cast it into the fire that never dies. Do not look back, and do not speak to anyone on the road. The woman you met at the gate was not a traveler. She was the manifestation of the very curse you held in your arms." Joshua stood tall, his face etched with a profound sorrow. He looked at Levi, whose welts were already beginning to fade. You sought a cheap covering for your body, Levi, but you left your spirit naked. Beware of gifts that cost less than the labor of an honest man. That night, after Levi had fled with the remains of the cloak, Joshua stood alone in the moonlight. He looked at his hands, now stained with the gray ash of the curse. He knew that this was but a single thread in a shroud of darkness that covered the entire Levant. The people were surrounded by ancient Tafwa, sorcery, and the remnants of pagan blood rites, hidden beneath the veneer of the law. He understood that his mission was not just to teach, but to perform a cosmic surgery, to cut away the woven hair of the dead from the hearts of the living. And as he looked toward the silhouette of Jerusalem in the distance, he knew that the ultimate shroud was waiting for him. The weaver of shadows was gone from Nazareth, but she was only one of many. The Levant was a land of caves, and every cave had a story that the Bible chose to forget. Part 2. The Inverted Head of the Cenotaph. As the sun of Joshua's 24th year rose over the jagged peaks of the Judean wilderness, the young Messiah found himself in the shadow of the holy city, Jerusalem. It was a place of gleaming marble and golden domes, but beneath its holy facade, the city sat upon a labyrinth of ancient tombs, some dating back to the age of the giants. Joshua was working with a crew of masons to repair the outer walls of a forgotten cenotaph, a monument dedicated to a high priest whose name had been stricken from the records for dabbling in the forbidden arts of the East. Accompanying Joshua was a young Judean named Jude, a man whose heart was filled with a dangerous, restless curiosity. One moonless night, while the rest of the crew slept, Jude approached Joshua. "Master," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "They say the inner vault of this tomb holds a relic that can turn lead into gold and grant a man the power to see his own death. The seals are broken. Let us go in." Joshua looked at the heavy stone door of the tomb. He felt a vibration, a low, rhythmic thumping that sounded like a heart beating inside a mountain of ice. "Jude," Joshua said, his voice carrying a weight that should have stopped any man. "There are doors that were meant to be closed by the hand of time. To open them is to invite a hunger that you cannot satisfy." But Jude did not listen. Driven by the greed that would one day define his namesake, he forced his way through the narrow gap in the stone. Joshua, knowing the horror that awaited, followed him into the suffocating darkness. The air inside the vault was not just cold, it was void-like. It tasted of copper and ancient dust. As Jude struck a flint, the sparks illuminated a massive stone altar in the center of the chamber. Sitting upon it was a limestone statue of a priest, but the statue was a nightmare of geometry. The body faced forward, its stone hands folded in a gesture of false peace. However, the head was inverted. It had been severed and placed back onto the neck so that it faced backward. Staring into the dark corner of the tomb with wide, bulging stone eyes. "It's just a rock," Jude laughed nervously, though his hands were shaking. "Look, the head is loose." Before Joshua could speak, Jude reached out and grabbed the stone head. He twisted it, attempting to face it forward. As the stone ground against stone, a sound erupted from the walls, a collective, wet gasp, as if 1,000 lungs had suddenly filled with fluid. Jude recoiled, but it was too late. The stone head didn't just turn, it changed. The limestone eyes of the statue began to weep a thick, black ichor that smelled of the grave. The mouth of the inverted head opened, and a voice that sounded like a swarm of locusts filled the vault. "You have looked upon the face of the abyss," the statue hissed. "Now, the abyss must look through you." Joshua stepped forward, his presence cutting through the darkness like a blade of pure light. He placed his hand on the altar, and the stone beneath his touch began to glow with a terrifying heat. "You are a memory of sin," Joshua proclaimed, his voice booming with authority that made the tomb walls tremble. "You have no dominion over the living. Return to the dust from which you were molded by the hands of the accursed." The shadows in the room coalesced into a singular, towering figure, a tall Lin, evil spirit of immense age. It lunged for Jude, but Joshua moved with a speed that defied human sight. He stood between the boy and the spirit, his arms outstretched, The spirit struck an invisible wall of sanctity and shattered into 1,000 shards of black glass. The statue's head fell to the floor and shattered. The vault grew silent, but the air remained heavy with the scent of ozone. Is it over? Jude whimpered, his face as pale as the shroud of a corpse. Joshua looked at Jude with a profound, piercing sorrow. He saw a shadow had been planted in the boy's eyes, a shadow that would grow into a betrayal years later. The stone is broken, Jude, but the image you saw is now etched into your soul. You have looked at the back of the world, and now the world will always look at you from behind. They emerged from the tomb into the gray light of dawn. Joshua walked in silence, his mind already weighing the cost of the souls he would have to save. He knew that the inverted head was a warning. Man's desire to see the hidden would eventually lead to his own destruction. From that day on, Jude was never the same. He was often found staring into corners, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Joshua watched him, knowing that the battle in the tomb was just a prelude to the great war for the souls of men. The Levant was a land of buried horrors, and Joshua was the only one with the strength to walk among them without becoming one of them. Part 3. The blood-stained papyrus of the Galilee Tavern. The moon over the Sea of Galilee was often a herald of peace. But in the year Joshua turned 26, the light seemed pale and sickly, as if the sky itself were weary. Joshua had traveled to a small, bustling port town near Magdala to repair the wooden beams of a local inn. The inn was a waypoint for weary travelers, Roman centurions, and merchants from the far reaches of the Silk Road. In the corner of the crowded, smoke-filled tavern, a man with hollow eyes and trembling hands sat clutching a weathered leather pouch. He was a merchant of high-end antiquities, but today, he looked like a beggar who had seen the face of a demon. He was trying to sell a single, crumpled sheet of Zaydah papyrus, an ancient script he claimed was a map to the first gold of Eden. "It is a treasure," the merchant cried to a group of mocking sailors. "My father died holding this. He was a man of great wealth, but he became a shadow, drinking himself to death while staring at these words. He left it for me, to celebrate my 20th year. But I cannot hold it. It is heavy, it is burning." Joshua, who was sitting quietly in the shadows with a cup of plain water, felt a pulse of Taki, malignant aura, emanating from the parchment. It was not the heat of fire, but the heat of a fever, a spiritual rot. The merchant, desperate for coin to fuel his own addiction to the bitter wines of the Levant, approached Joshua. "You, stone worker, you have the hands of a man who knows value. 1 gold denarius, and this map is yours. It is my father's legacy." Joshua reached out and took the papyrus. The moment his skin touched the fiber, the tavern noise seemed to vanish into a vacuum. He did not see a map. He saw a ledger of despair. Gai lat mat sao kua tze, he flipped the parchment over. Beneath the flickering oil lamp, the truth was revealed. The back of the papyrus was not blank. It was covered in thousands of tiny, cramped characters, written in a dark, brownish-red ink that Joshua knew was not made from any plant or mineral. The word was repeated over and over, thousands of times. Wine, row. The handwriting started out elegant and firm, but as the eye moved down the page, the letters became jagged, frantic, and eventually devolved into bloody smears. It was the handwriting of a man descending into madness. A father who had written his own addiction into the very soul of the gift he intended for his son. "This is not a map to gold," Joshua said, his voice cutting through the merchant's greed like a cold wind. "This is a record of a soul that drowned while standing on dry land. Your father did not leave you a legacy, he left you his thirst." The merchant's face contorted. "What are you saying? It is gold. It must be gold." Joshua held the papyrus up. To the merchant's eyes, the red ink suddenly began to weep. The word, wine, started to liquefy, dripping off the parchment and onto the floor. But it didn't look like wine, it looked like Mauko, dried blood. The tavern floor where the droplets fell began to hiss, as if the liquid were acidic. "Every time you look at this," Joshua spoke, his eyes locking onto the merchant's soul, "you do not see a future. You see the ghost of your father's failure. He wrote this in his final hours, hoping the gold would save you. But he signed it with the very demon that destroyed him. If you keep this, you will find only a grave at the bottom of a jar. The merchant let out a strangled cry and recoiled, falling over a wooden bench. The sailors laughed, thinking it was a trick of the light. But Joshua's face remained stone cold. He laid the papyrus on the table. Take your silver elsewhere, Joshua commanded the tavern keeper who had moved toward the paper. This treasure is a debt that can never be paid by man. Joshua picked up the papyrus and walked to the hearth in the center of the room. He cast the ancient script into the flames. As the parchment caught fire, the smoke that rose was not gray or white, it was a thick, oily black, and for a fleeting second, the tavern goers heard the sound of a man's sobbing voice echoing from the coals. The fire of the hearth is kinder than the fire of the thirst, Joshua whispered. He left the inn and walked along the shore of the Galilee. He realized that the world was filled with such gifts, inheritances of trauma, addiction, and sin, passed from father to son like a holy relic. He knew that soon, he would have to offer a different kind of inheritance, one written not in the blood of despair, but in the blood of sacrifice. The merchant was found the next day, weeping by the roadside. He was sober for the first time in years, but he complained that every time he closed his eyes, he saw the word, life, written in light. Joshua had burned the curse, but the memory of the fire remained. Part 4. The Weeping Mistress of the Magdala Scrolls. In the year before Joshua began his journey toward the Jordan, he traveled to the coastal city of Magdala. It was a city of luxury and decadence, a place where Roman coin met the ancient arts of the East. While working in the estate of a wealthy collector of antiquities, a man who prided himself on owning the soul of the world, Joshua came across a hidden chamber. The collector, an old man named Baruch, showed Joshua a particular treasure he had acquired through blood and deception. It was a Gun Tran scroll, an exquisite piece of art painted on fine silk, depicting a young woman standing alone in a torrential rain. Her beauty was so profound it felt unnatural. Her eyes seemed to follow the viewer with a sorrow that could pull the heart right out of a man's chest. This, Baruch whispered, his hands trembling as he unrolled the silk, is the woman of the rain. They say the painter loved her so much he sold his soul to a desert demon just to capture the exact shade of her sadness. He spent every drachma he had to keep her from other men, and when he went bankrupt, he died holding this very scroll. Joshua looked at the painting. To the human eye, it was a masterpiece. To Joshua's divine sight, it was a haunted object, a spiritual cage. The woman in the painting was not a representation of a human. She was a manifestation of the spirit of lust and obsession. She is beautiful, is she not? Baruch's son, a young man named Ammon, stood in the shadows of the room. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin was sallow. He hadn't slept for days. He stood staring at the scroll with a hunger that was almost animalistic. She spoke to me last night, Joshua. She said if I bring her enough offerings, she will step out of the silk and be mine. Joshua turned to the old man. You did not buy a painting, Baruch. You bought a mirror that reflects only the rot in a man's heart. Your friend did not die for love, he died because he worshipped a shadow. And now that shadow is eating your son. Baruch laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Nonsense. It is art, it is value. But that night, a storm broke over Magdala. The rain hammered against the stone walls of the estate like the fists of 1,000 ghosts. Joshua was awakened by a blood-curdling scream. He rushed to the collector's chamber and found Ammon on his knees before the scroll. The room was filled with the scent of damp earth and rotting flowers. The woman in the painting was no longer still. Under the flickering light of a single oil lamp, the silk seemed to ripple like water. The woman's eyes were no longer painted, they were real, wet, and filled with a terrifying, ancient malice. She was reaching out of the scroll, her long, slender fingers, gray and cold, were wrapped around Ammon's throat. He is mine, the painting hissed, the voice sounding like the wind through a graveyard. He has looked too long. He has given me his soul. Ammon was gasping, his face turning a sickly blue. Baruch stood frozen in horror, unable to move. Joshua stepped into the center of the room. He did not use a sword or a ritual. He simply spoke a single word of Qian Nong, power. Be gone. The sound of Joshua's voice hit the scroll like a physical blow. The divine light emanating from him was so bright that the woman let out a shriek of agony. The gray fingers retracted into the silk. The rain in the painting, which had been falling for 100 years, suddenly stopped. Joshua walked to the scroll and placed his hand over the woman's face. You are a lie born of a man's obsession. You have no breath, no life, and no place among the living. As Guy fanned, he spoke. The colors on the silk began to fade. The beautiful woman withered into a skeletal, Ho-Sao-Ko-like, distorted shape before dissolving into a gray mist. The silk became blank, a hollow piece of fabric that held no more power. Aemon fell to the floor, gasping for air. The spell was broken, but his mind would never fully recover from the beauty of the dark. Baruch, seeing his fortune vanish, fell to his knees in despair. You have destroyed my treasure, Baruch wailed. I have saved your son from a grave that has no bottom. Joshua replied, his eyes filled with a terrifying holiness. Beauty that demands a soul is not beauty, it is a trap. You seek to own a woman who never existed, while your own flesh and blood dies in front of you. Joshua left the estate before dawn. As he walked through the rain-soaked streets of Magdala, he realized that the world was obsessed with icons, things they could see and touch, things they could possess. They did not understand that the true image of the Creator was within them, not in scrolls of silk or statues of stone. He knew that the woman of the rain was just one of many mistresses of the abyss that ruled the hearts of men. He looked at the horizon, where the first light of the sun was breaking through the storm. And he knew that the war for the eyes of men had only just begun. Part 5. The Abyss Within the Cedar Chest. In the final months before Joshua's emergence as the light of the world, a caravan of merchants from the far reaches of the east arrived in the hills of Judea. They carried spices, silks, and a singular, terrifying burden, a cedar chest bound in rusted iron chains and sealed with the wax of a forgotten temple. The merchants brought the chest to a wealthy nobleman in Jericho, hoping to sell it for a king's ransom. But the chest was a cursed object of such intensity that it corrupted the very air around it. Birds fell dead from the sky as the caravan passed, horses went mad and threw themselves off cliffs. Joshua was in Jericho at the time, helping to rebuild a wall that had collapsed without explanation. He felt the weight of the chest before he even saw it. It felt like an abyss, a hole in the fabric of the Creator's design. The nobleman's accountant, a man named Elihu, found Joshua. Master, he whispered, his face pale with dread. The animals are vanishing. The servants hear the sound of 10,000 voices moaning beneath the floorboards. My master is dying of a fever that no physician can name. It began when that chest entered our gates. Joshua followed Elihu to the estate's vault. There, in the center of the cold stone room, sat the chest. It was beautiful yet repulsive, its surface covered in intricate carvings of demons and suffering souls. As Joshua approached, a traveler who possessed the sight for spirits stepped out from the shadows. He looked at Joshua and immediately fell to his knees, retching from the sheer intensity of the evil radiating from the wood. That is not a box. The traveler gasped. It is a portal to hell. I have seen the dark places of the earth. But this is the essence of every murder, every scream, every betrayal ever committed. It is a bubbling cauldron of the damned. Joshua stood before the chest. He did not touch it yet. He closed his eyes and saw the truth of its origin, a temple in a far-off land, burned to the ground by a man who had gone mad after opening it, a monk who had died instantly after trying to seal it. The chest had fed on their agony for centuries. Suddenly, the chains around the box began to rattle. The iron grew red hot. A voice, thick with the stench of the grave, erupted from within. Why do you come, son of the morning? You have no power here. This is the weight of human sin, and it is heavier than your love. Joshua reached out his hand. I do not come with love alone. He spoke with absolute authority. I come with the truth that was before the world began. You are a vessel of shadow, but I am the light that the shadow cannot comprehend. Joshua placed his bare palms on the red-hot iron. The sound of sizzling flesh echoed in the room. But Joshua's face did not flinch. Under his touch, the iron turned from red to white, then crumbled into dust. The wax seals melted away like morning mist. The lid of the chest creaked open just a fraction. A terrifying sight was revealed to Joshua's eyes. The chest was filled with hundreds of dry, shriveled palms of infants. They were small, gray, and twitching, reaching upward as if to pull the world down into their silent, eternal misery. It was a physical manifestation of the most innocent lives stolen by the cruelty of men. One day, Joshua whispered, his eyes filled with a divine fury and a profound sorrow, "I shall descend into the deepest pit and take the keys to this prison. But for now, sleep." He slammed the lid shut with a force that shook the foundations of Jericho. He then traced a symbol of sanctity on the wood, a mark that no demon could cross. The moaning stopped. The fever of the nobleman broke. The animals returned to the hills. Joshua ordered that the chest be taken into the deep desert, far from the paths of men, and buried under 40 cubits of salt and sand. He knew that the world was not yet ready for the full release of those souls. He knew that he, and he alone, would have to be the ultimate vessel for all the world's curses. Joshua walked away from the buried chest, his hands still marked by the heat of the iron. These were the years the world forgot, the years when the carpenter of Nazareth did not just build homes for men, but tore down the strongholds of the abyss. He had faced the woven shroud of hair, the inverted head of the tomb, the blood-stained papyrus of despair, the weeping lady of obsession, and the cedar chest of the damned. He had seen the worst of us, the darkest parts of our history, and the curses we have woven for ourselves. He mastered the darkness so that when the time finally came for him to stand by the Jordan River, he would not just be a man of words, but a conqueror of the unseen. The 18 years of silence were the loudest years of the war for your soul. Now, the carpenter is ready, the light is coming, and the caves will never be the same. Thank you for watching the Forgotten Chronicles. Do not fear the dark, for the master of the abyss has already walked through it. Like, subscribe, and stay in the light.